It's pleased to see you. Thank you very much.
What's the one?
Thank you, no, my haere mai ki te hui. This hui is all about our regional public transport long-term plan, which we're getting underway. And so welcome to our transport team, and I'll just open us with karakia and come back to that. So tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te here tangata, ka rongo te pau, te pō, ka rongo te ao, hui e. And welcome to the transport team. We've got Jack, Daniel, Grace, Robin, and heading us up is Lorraine. Thank you very much. And a slide pack to get through, so I'll turn over to you and thank you. I'll just sort of add that this plan is going up for consultation early next year, and we're just in the process of doing stuff on that. All your own.
Great, thank you. And welcome everybody here today to this is our second workshop on the RPTP. I'm just really here today to introduce the team, and in particular, firstly to introduce you to Robin Hyde, who is a consultant working for us specifically on the Regional Public Transport Plan, and us means Jack, who you're mostly familiar with, Daniel and Grace. And today's topic of today's workshop is to start looking at the objectives for the RPTP and to cover off some material relating to land use and transport integration, which we're thinking is going to be some interesting material for helping you to determine where you want to go with some of the services that we're looking at, and some of the actions that will ultimately take, and with that the investments that we'll make, because the public transport plan really does provide that level of service that you want to achieve with the investment. I made a little quip yesterday at a meeting. We need to obviously review our RPTP as soon as practical after the Regional Land Transport Plan, and that's why Councillor Forbes mentioned that we'll be looking to go to public consultation early next year. I made a little quip that we should probably actually review it after the NLTP allocations, because they have a big impact on how much extra co-funding we get that can make these our investments and the delivery of our levels of service realistic. But fundamentally, we still need to understand from you what we really want to do, and to what level and why, and then it's really our job to work out how quickly or how widely we can deliver that with the funding that's available. Also like to welcome here today our colleagues from Dunedin City Council, got Abby Chamberlain and Helen Chapman. So the Regional Public Transport Plan, obviously public transport needs to be delivered in conjunction with our territorial authorities, and we're working with all of the TAs in terms of delivering on, I guess, the coordination of transport services and public transport infrastructure to achieve those overall desired levels of service. I think that's about it. That's about what I know about today's workshop, so I have to hand over now to the team.
All right, thanks everybody. We're just gonna talk about our review of the RPTP. So what to expect from us today. We're just going to do a quick recap of sort of where we've come from, where we're at right now, and talk about the big thing is about how we plan to structure this document. We spent a lot of time looking at other regional councils and what they've done with their documents, and had a lot of meetings to figure out what is the best way to go about it. And we decided that it would be best if we sort of lead this document chapter by chapter, going through these sort of focal areas or objectives, And underneath each of those, we've got specific policies and actions. So our goal for you all today is to sort of listen to us talk about some of these objectives and actions and policies, and just let us know, give us your feedback on sort of, just to reflect on our thinking, and we want to know what you think as well. Hopefully it shouldn't take longer than 2 hours. And in terms of your engagement with this, really important that write down as many notes or thoughts that you have, keeping in mind that we will probably talk about a lot of things. We will omit certain things just due to time. And so, yeah, if you want to talk about something specific, please write it down, knowing that we may bring it up later.
Yeah, I mean, and just to comment further, just on the structure, in general, at the start it'll be us talking openly, and we hope to transition as the thing goes to more opportunities for you guys to jump in and bring in what's important for you guys, as councillors, to be involved in the process. So so be aware of those opportunities to jump in and get your interests and issues involved in the conversation at the appropriate opportunity. But the first few slides might be a bit more us. Okay, so firstly, just to quickly summarize we were at from last workshop. So obviously the starting point was the RPT thing, and it was Lorraine's summary is that it's sort of the social contract of public transport in the region. So it's the social contract with us, with our community, about how we're going to run public transport is kind of the underlying what this document is. It's not a direct funding document like the RLTP, but it's a really substantive document in terms of the detail and the policies in it. In the last workshop, we focused really hard on sort of the network planning area. We focused really hard on what it means to have an integrated or a connected network. I mean, and in particular, the trade-offs that we have to make, decisions around ridership and coverage. In short, ridership outcomes are those sort of really hard outcomes, your patronage, and so on. That would relate to your interest in getting people out of cars onto our services, and all those social and environmental benefits that sort of come at scale when PT is performing really well and when people are riding PT. Coverage outcomes are potentially the more equity-oriented outcomes. They're a bit harder to express in hard numbers. And maybe how many people have basic access to services, even if the services aren't brilliant. And it would focus increasingly on disadvantaged groups, not to say that disadvantaged groups aren't also benefited by the ridership side of the equation. So the real point is that at some point we have hard decisions to make and setting that balance, and we do need to understand the consequences of our decisions. If we make a decision that focuses on that coverage side of things, we shouldn't be too surprised when it doesn't lead to ridership outcomes. And the other point I drew a bit of attention to was it's not our job as staff to set that balance, but when we make unstructured decisions, we do tend to fall on one side of those sort of balances, and not deliver optimal outcomes. So we as staff do need to articulate some of those, the harder side of that, the ridership outcomes, and how we can deliver those. And we also went into a first policy area emerging from that, which was the sort of school services area. As public transport networks become stronger, we become more able to accommodate the travel of school children on regular services, so particularly in larger cities, rather than putting on special services as you would in a weaker public transport network. We've moved in that direction in Otago because our services have strengthened, but we have run into the limits of that in some cases, and we found that some decisions we've been making have not actually been in line with our current RPTP policies. We've even added some new school services, or school targeted services, as Richard would emphasise. There's also obviously been a lot of issues with Ministry of Education school services, which sort of run in parallel to our network. And when our network strengthens, those services tend to be withdrawn, putting extra pressure on us, and that can leave us scrambling. So in any case, that's where we went through in our last workshop. So we obviously made a lot more progress in our plan with a significantly enhanced team and some really good thinking from some really good contributions from all these guys, as well as occasionally me. So let's get into focusing on the work we're doing on our current plan. how that sort of strategic thing. So it's going to start look out with the sort of strategic thinking, flowing down from this council's strategic directions. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide.
So you will be familiar with these images. On the left, oh, thank you. On the left, we have the ORC strategic directions, and on the right, we have the three transport goals, the three transport goals of those strategic directions. Our plan is a reflection of the ORC strategic directions, and in particular, these three transport goals. That being said, our desire to meet all 18 goals is reflected in this plan. And I would say particularly the communities and climate goals we speak to in depth. Drawing on this transport aspiration on the left and its corresponding goals, we have created 5 focus areas to center our plan around. In this top focused area, we speak to the principles of integrated network-oriented planning principles, which Jack discussed with you in the last workshop. In our passenger experience focus area, we discuss the accessibility and community well-being aspirations of our services. This third one, our value for money section, outlines how we will fund our network in a way that is affordable for both users and the wider community. That's ratepayers. The build trust focus area is about how we engage our stakeholders and collaborators to identify what our community well-being aspirations are and how we can fulfill them. Lastly, in environmental sustainability, we speak to how our activities will contribute positively to the environment, and in particular, how our work directly lowers Otago's emissions. This workshop, as mentioned, is your opportunity to provide input on our thinking and check that these focus areas align with your priorities. Jack will expand on this here.
Yeah. So those 5 focus areas from the previous one, from the previous slide, they all relate to one. So this is a sort of one-to-one mapping in our structure, and this will be reflected in the chapter structure of our plan. That these 5 focus areas will relate to an objective, and the objective will explain a bit more detail of what those focus areas mean, and where and how we're going to approach that. So we workshop these quite intensively, just internally among ourselves, and we went through quite a few iterations to build this as a starting point to present to you guys. So while these will be subject to discussion to the process, we think this is a really good baseline to start the discussion on, and we've done obviously a lot of work on policies and issues and seeing how they fall under these areas, and we're quite satisfied that the broad structure of them and the broad intent will be a really good structure for our plan. Just the substance of chapters and so on in the plan. One thing we found, some plans we really liked and were really strongly structured around objectives like these. And objective 1 started on page 10 of the plan after a brief introduction, and then almost all of the plan, I think a few appendices, was under these sorts of objectives. So that's our goal through writing the substance and the text of this plan and the policies and so on. So, Robin, on to you. We'll just.
Yes, Grace has outlined our 5 focus areas, and Jack's explained how they map out to our objectives. So the main crux of our workshop today is now expanding these out to what our policies and actions might look like. So the policies and actions basically form the foundation of our RPTP. So each focus area will cover a number of policies, which were laid out with a couple of examples here. So for example, our first one there, a connected and integrated network, the likely policy topics that will fit under that are how we design our network, how our services will work within our network, and how we deliver our infrastructure. So this is our opportunity to lay out what is important to us as we deliver PT across our region, and we're keen to get your thoughts and input into shaping our policies and actions and hear what's important to you. So I wonder if we just take sort of 30 seconds or a minute, and if you could write down perhaps 1 or 2 public transport issues that are important to you, and then have a think about how we might solve these through our policies and actions as we go through this part of the RPTP. Cool, so just hold those thoughts, and as we go through the next sections, each of the team is going to focus on one particular area and step you through it, and then we're going to try and speak to the things that you've just written down as we go through. So just recognising that these 5 areas, collectively, the policies and actions that sit under them, lead to how we can get more people riding public transport more often in our region. Just also around the policies and things, NZTA guidance and our legislation requirements, there are certain policies that we have to have within our RPTP, and so they guide us a little bit as well. Can we just go to the next slide? So the purpose of these next couple of slides is just to give you guys a little bit of an example of how some of the other regional councils have shaped their RPTPs and what a policy might look like. There's quite a variation out there. This first one here is quite a prescriptive policy with some, like I say, very prescriptive and really specific. The next one is a more broader policy, which is purposely broad for some reasons, but then the actions provide the specificity of what the council will do to deliver those. And I think we're kind of getting that away, particularly with most of our policies is for a broader policy, and then we'll get to the nitty-gritties through our actions and how as a council we can deliver those policies. So I might just take a pause now before we go into our next slide, which is, oh, actually, sorry, no. Do I do the example one first?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll do the example one first. Sorry, beg pardon. So sorry, just take a moment. So the team is going to go through, as I mentioned, each of the topic areas, each of the focus areas. Some of the policies, so the purpose of the slide is to show you that link between an objective and then how a policy might sit under that objective, and then some actions, some of which we've got really well mapped out and got quite specific about and are keen to get your feedback on. The second line here is perhaps an area that we're really seeking some feedback on. So we've just got a policy topic, we've got no actions other than a couple of examples that perhaps other councils have used. So maybe if we just take a pause, are there any questions? Does anything come up to you?
Kate? Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, and it's great stuff, but if I look at your how the structure or the areas, there's a couple of things I just want to check. The congestion, where does that come in as a solution under your 5 focus areas? Because often we do this just about the bus rather than thinking about the network.
That comes in different different areas. I talk about it in, we talk about it in the environmental sustainability, where we talk about urban design. So designing areas that can hopefully have less congestion.
Yeah, and we'd also consider those issues through sort of the service design side of things. So you know, community service and these sort of things, but obviously the land use side of things also integrates with some of those considerations about other modes of transport. You know, your walking and cycling as preferred modes of transport would be reflected in that land use stuff, because there'd be, you know, obviously our ultimate focus in this is public transport, but we do operate in a wider transport environment as well. And so we think this is the way to balance those things in a public transport context.
And that's great. I mean, active was also part of that question,
Yeah.
because and the context here is obviously Queenstown is a huge area of issues with congestion, and unless we're measuring the other stuff, we can't see what effect it can have, and the justification for bus lanes, although I don't think there's an option for Queenstown. Yeah.
We'd also traverse it as part of the sort of value for money and our fare structure as well, that encouraging people to get out of their cars and use public transport.
Okay, I just think in Queensland it almost needs its own topic, but yeah, focus area, but yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Kate. That's some awesome suggestions and it's awesome. I like the way you've structured this with the high level objectives and coming through. Our next question is from Brian Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Taking Kate's question further, how are we performing in relation to our goals? Like, how are we trending? Do we give ourselves a mark? Do we aim for a higher mark next year when we do this?
So
Do you want me to take that quickly?
Yeah, let's see what it is.
okay.
So at the moment, I think it's fair to say we monitor what is probably prescribed to us to be monitored through NZTA, and that does and doesn't tell you necessarily as decision makers how we're tracking towards achieving the outcomes of the current, all of the outcomes of the current RPTP. So this is something that I feel like I'm quite hot under the collar about, because I'm really not keen to just provide data and information for monitoring's sake. I mean, you should monitor and collect information on the information that you want to influence as decision makers, and that should then inform your investment. And I think maybe it was easier for us in the last couple of periods of doing this work, because there was a little bit more money in the public transport space to work with. Now we're going to have to be super slick in understanding what interventions are successful to delivering on the moving us towards achieving our objectives. So it's a very important part. I think that it come to it later in the document in terms around the monitoring and
Okay,
feedback
well,
loop.
that's fair enough. I've listened to your response. Thank you.
Microphone,
It doesn't
please,
actually
Brian.
help me.
Okay.
It doesn't actually help me, like here we are today, 22nd of October, 2024. We've set goals. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about a plan. It would be helpful for me to know where we really are performing in relation to congestion, connection, climate change, the different goals. So I had some confidence that we are moving in a better direction.
Yeah, I think that's a thoughtful comment. I don't think obviously what we're presenting today is a selection of policies and actions. It's not, we're not being exhaustive, but we have had some two sides. One is the where we are at now, and going into this, part of the comment was where we have in the past few years been in that post-COVID era of being very operational, slight survival mode. And part of the goal of this plan is to move beyond that sort of survival mode into a bit more long-term thinking. So that is probably almost at the heart of the plan of the reasons for this plan, is articulating this is where we're at, and therefore this is where we're moving forward. It's kind of the reason why we are reviewing the plan. The second side of things in terms of the going forward, and the data side of things, getting a better understanding of our performance, because as Lorraine says, sometimes our data work is focused on meeting requirements, and then over time that puts us in a weaker position when those requirements change. So having a deeper understanding of our data is something in our discussions we've actually talked about.
Well, it sounds like we need to be more honest about our goals then.
Can I just ask a question? So would it help you and help the process if I guess what you're asking for is if we can present as much benchmark information for the objectives as part of this process?
Well, it just seemed to me, sorry, I do apologise, I don't mean to hijack the meeting or anything, but we started off with the goals, and I look at the goals and say, that's really good. I love the word connection. And then I think, well, how are we going? And what really are the levers that we're putting in? So like you might say, I'm a numbers person, you might say, well, we're 50% of the way to actually get to where we want to be in relation to connection. If we do all this we sit here today and we do different things, we might get to 70% because this is, this is how we define connection. And that's truly what our goals are. But it sounds to me that the goals are really recovering from COVID, meeting NZTA requirements.
No, that's what we're monitoring at the moment.
Yeah.
We could, and I'm happy to provide more benchmark information through the process, but it's a little bit iterative. You have to set the goals.
Yeah.
So that we know we need to monitor and measure them. I think what I was saying before is we haven't consistently monitored and measured all of the goals and the objectives from the current RPTP, but that is part of how we are, we propose to go forward, and part of what we're addressing in the document. We can provide benchmark information around some measures, but we still really need the process of the goal setting and confirmation by yourselves before we would set up a comprehensive monitoring regime. And we do measure, we do have a number of measures, and they mostly come through in the quarterly network performance measures that go to council, but we would need to expand it out specifically for the objectives in the RPTP.
So I think to just add to that, Brian, it's not dissimilar to the conversation we've had in other committees around, we don't do a lot of outcome monitoring. So we do a lot of stuff and we report on a lot of things, but we don't necessarily look back and say, how are we going against the goals that we've set ourselves, be it environmental or in this case transport. So this is focusing on setting up the RPTP in a way that will allow us to measure these things that you are giving us direction to do. So that's effectively the process the team will work through, and part of that will be to ensure there's a monitoring system in place. I mean, at the moment, from my point of view, not being neck deep in this, my view of the PT system, looking at our numbers post-COVID, is that we are running two very successful public transport networks based on the ridership numbers that we're attracting and the growth that we are attracting in both Queenstown and Dunedin. That's not to say there's not more we could do for some of those broader objectives around emissions and around connectivity and around, mode choices and other things. We just, at the moment, have focused on ridership as a key metric of a successful public transport network. So this gives us the chance to develop something that's broader and can speak to some more of those broader goals that have been set through our strategic directions.
Sounds like right. Number of people in their buses as they come.
Thanks, Brian. Andrew?
Brian's triggered me to just reflect on the last plan we did 3 years ago, and I'll just quote on the forward that someone else wrote for me at the time. This plan's about being responsive. We must respond to the national direction for more climate resilient future, as well as what our passengers need to encourage more people to use public transport. It should be more attractive and accessible. This means different things for different people, but generally it's about convenience, access, better infrastructure and affordability, as well as being well integrated with other services by ways to travel, like linking cycling, walking options. So we'll be saying a similar objective and vision than we did 3 years ago, and Richard just nailed it in terms of what comes across the table. We're obviously making really good progress, even though that we haven't got the numbers here in this presentation, but we know they've been delivered to the table in another forum. But it's going to be a similar process, and we're going to be focused on similar things. But obviously there's been a couple of key, you talked about greenfields, and there was something else, disadvantaged service to include better service for the disadvantaged. So I see the parallels, and but obviously we're just going to take another step further. Is that fair enough? Sorry, I'm not stopping.
No. We also really want to acknowledge that, we really, in terms of everything that has just been read out and where the current RPTP is, we've noted previously it was a product of its time coming out of COVID, but we don't have a broke system. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to do what we're required to do and get, in particular, this council's stamp on, now that we've achieved this much, where do we take the next iteration of our public transport investment and our contract with the community.
So I think we've heard quite a lot about, we want to have this more systemic view. It's bringing in all those other things as well. Are you going to take us through some more steps here, or is this the point where you want us to go through that?
And sorry, just one more point on that. We are going to take step through these, so there'll be more opportunities to input. But if you do have something specifically that you'd like to see measured, that's really great. And that's we can build that into our actions. So if we keep the objectives in this high level piece to the document, because it is a strategic document, we can then funnel it down to our actions, which can be very specific. We, maybe that we want to achieve X by Y, like what can we do over the next 3 out to 10 years?
Thank you.
So onwards to the first of our objectives is the sort of connected and integrated network objective, and this is the one that relates the most to the previous workshop. So happy. So as discussed from here on in, this is a more open workshop. I'm very happy to get people jumping in with issues relating to the topics on screen. But I'll get us moving with discussion here. So on the screen we have sort of 3 policy areas. One is the service design principles, which is the general stuff from the first workshop. The second is sort of the regional network scale, and the third is the targeted services, which includes the school services and how they fit into the overall public transport network. And as with a lot of policies, we have existing policies and we have existing practices which are more detailed than the existing policies. So we're not always writing new policies, and when we are writing new policies, they may be an expression of existing practices, and trying to say in words what we already do. So looking at the service design principles, the general issues are ridership coverage issues, and certain service design things such as not duplicating services, don't run two buses down the same route at the same time, and enhancing connections and service styles. And this is again something we do really well compared to our comparators around New Zealand, councils of similar size. Our long service hours are a real strength, and they really support the usability of our network all day long. So in the actions from service design principles, I've given an example of an action to implement the sort of ridership coverage thing. And this is to sort of say we go on, because our existing network is more ridership oriented, both in Queenstown and Dunedin than it is coverage oriented, but it still contains a decent chunk of coverage thinking as well. And what I've written down here as an action is sort of trying to express how we'd maintain express that more clearly, what we already do, and maintain it. So it's sort of saying, hey, ridership is the priority, but we still maintain coverage, and we still consider coverage as a secondary benefit of our services. So that's the general gist of how we might express that in a really explicit action. Similarly, the community transport area is in a low funding environment. We're not going to get much funding for building an expensive regional subsidised network. But the one action we really can undertake is to support community transport services. I understand this has been discussed around the table previously, but essentially being able to get into those small communities and get at that very base level of service for people with the greatest need. And the third one is sort of around the targeted service series. The example I've given here is school services. This was again the previous discussion and at the previous meeting. But looking at that, being able to say, hey, there are some circumstances in which we might provide a targeted service through the day where there's a really strong flow of passengers that can't reasonably be covered on the public network. Because while our network's a lot stronger than it is, it still doesn't provide every possible transport connection, because it just doesn't scale up that well. So that's a key to action. So really keen to get your thoughts on that sort of service design area and any of these areas as how you'd want to see that in policies and actions.
Jack, do you want these thoughts now, or do you want us to write to you?
Now that-
Go for it, yeah.
Now's a good time
Now's
if you want to get your.
Kate, and no, I've got.
Thank you. Look, schools will be a difficult one in that a lot of people want to support the local schools, and that's just an argument I can't bother going with. But the issue of the health equity is the biggest one for me here. For people being able to, and so people with Alberta that cannot get health equity, or get to services, and that built around that, and then maybe assisting schools if there is a need, is something else and much more, a bit more appetite.
We know there's need, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
Thanks for that comment. I think I just, that was something that was raised in one of the engagements with our territorial authorities, especially, the rural ones, saying basically health equity, we want to make sure that we can provide some form of transport to get people health services.
I mean, yeah, and the issue is in places like Auckland that they can't sell their house and buy into Dunedin at the same value, a house, and get the services they need. So we need to be able to make it available. And it's not just Buckford, it's definitely everywhere. And that connection, I think it's a better argument than school services. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. Is this where we start thinking about making sure that we're mapping and understand the community services that are already there? Is this part of your thinking in terms of the network?
Yes, so in our engagement with territorial authorities, we already had people raising existing operations in certain communities, and we understand that in the community transport area, one of the first steps is to tap into existing networks and provide support for things that are existing, and then over time, and this is some discussions we've had with Canterbury and Waikato who do these things especially well, is that over time you can start developing, when you have that sort of environment, new things might be viable as well. But in general, the starting point is going to be tapping into existing services and seeing what support we can provide to those communities. And obviously it's especially important for those sort of those secondary state highway areas, as Councillor Wilson mentioned, where there's not even a city service.
So do you have a similar approach in terms of active transport to support that network, to make sure that you understand the active transport networks that are pre-existing, and how we might work with territorial authorities to make sure that those networks can mesh with our services?
I would say it's not been such an area of focus on this plan, but we are aware of the wider active and public transport connectivity sort of direction that council has provided, and that we'll be wanting to consider this connection across those modal boundaries as well.
And that takes me to the other point around schools, as there's a, do we look at school services where we can't perhaps get a bus that helps? Can we advise around things like walking buses, cycling buses, and ensuring that that the TAs involved are ensuring that the active transport network that can enable that will happen?
I think, so one of the things that we're going to talk about in a little bit, objective number 4, is about building trust with TAs. And so I think that it's safe to say that the ORC and all the other TAs that we work with are all pretty much on board for active transport. And so I think it sort of combines our objective to build trust, to work with them around public transport. So I think that your sort of question kind of gets embedded throughout the plan through objective 4.
Yeah. A lot of these issues will come back around again. For example, the event, another targeted services, the events policy. I think Grace is going to speak more to that under the second focus area. So a lot of this does come around again as we go through some of the topics. But is there anything else you want to raise on this area?
Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I didn't have too much to say on this one, because I just think it's something that we're just in general heading in the right direction on. It's just a matter of scale, how much we're willing to put in and get out in terms of ridership and service hours and stuff. But I do think service hours will be a really critical one in terms of well above the improvements that we'd planned for in the LTP around that, and going forward even more extensive development and stuff. But all the rest of my thoughts are sort of more in other areas, so that's the only one here.
Next one.
So next, we'll get into our second focus area, which is passenger experience. Here you'll see most in-depth our process of workshopping this objective wording. And so what I'm about to go through is an outcome of a lot of work of that. So you'll see our thinking here. Simply put, we want people in Otago to have more transport choice. Beyond that, we want public transport to be one of their preferred choices because it is a positive experience and they feel good using public transport. Some people have no other choice of mode, while others may choose to not own a car. Either way, everyone should feel safe and that their well-being needs are being met. Informed by this thinking, our passenger experience objective is to provide useful public transport services that respect the safety and well-being of passengers, particularly for people experiencing transport disadvantages. To walk us through the thought behind this objective, the term useful is established in global public transport best practices and refers to the importance of well-functioning, reliable networks in passenger experience. We include it to emphasize that services can be safe, comfortable, accessible, but underlying that they must be reliable enough to be useful to our passengers. Prioritizing the safety and well-being of passengers is a pretty comprehensive statement. A safe service is the bare minimum for us, but it is something that requires continuous attention. Between NZTA looking to see safety emphasized in RPTPs and a few close to home major antisocial behavior incidents, which have affected public perception of our services, especially in Dunedin, it needs to be prioritized in our work over the next 10 years and beyond. And then ensuring the well-being of our passengers is inherently a good thing, but it also is what attracts people with mode choice to our services. Lastly, our focus on serving people with transport disadvantages. These include people with accessibility needs, mobility impairments, no private vehicle access, and low incomes, as well as people living in isolated rural locations. Without paying adequate attention to these groups, public transport systems often fail to meet their needs. We're committed to ensuring our services are accessible to these often underserved groups as a result. With this thought process laid out, we'd love to hear your thoughts, if there are any to provide at this point.
We'll go into more detail in the slides, but in terms of the overall.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Right, I'm just thinking in terms of transport disadvantage. I suppose no private vehicle access refers to anyone that doesn't have a driver's license. But I often think that in this transport disadvantage space, the 14-year-old teenager is left out. And I wonder if we need to almost specifically think about them, because they're at that point of their life where they're pushing their parents away. They want to be independent, and we don't enable it very well.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. No private vehicle access includes youth, that exact demographic, and that's something that we can choose to be more explicit about when speaking to transport disadvantaged folks.
And from having worked in the total mobility space, and that independence issue is really important, because that total mobility space it's not just about meeting basic needs, but it is about, and this is why in the previous objective we drew attention to the word freedom, which is a slightly can be a slightly contentious word, but in that total mobility space, total mobility is not just about people being able to get to medical services. It's about being able to travel around the community as anyone can. So that independence, whether it's younger people or people with disabilities, is really cool to think, and that's why that we we're keen on that freedom word, even though it's a really contested word.
Well, it recognises the well-being impacts of independence and freedom. You had something input, and then Angela.
Yeah, I was just wanting to check, so is this a draft objective for the plan we're working on now? Yeah, and is that the same for the policies and actions and stuff that we're seeing in slides from here? Those are just draft ones for.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool, because I was just looking at the objective and wondering sort of what respect means in terms of actually achieving the safety and well-being of passengers, but I don't know what but it would replace it with, and I was just wanting to check that well-being, would that cover just passengers' general enjoyment of their bus ride? Even if it's not related to, this safety in any way or anything. Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks.
Angela?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wondered about design principles for the disadvantaged or people with disabilities. And I know with the Building Act, New Zealand regs are already very out of date with international standards. And I just wondered whether there's been any thought about making sure that we are up to speed in that space. I know it's probably more of an action than getting into the rats and mice, but I think it's important to at least have an objective that we have a standard that is accepted in this modern age.
Yeah, are you thinking about fleet infrastructure?
Across the board, actually.
Yeah.
Whether it's stops, shelters. You would have spoken to John Marable over the years, and he talked about getting on a bus in a wheelchair and being able to actually lock your wheelchair in front to back or back to front rather than sideways. Just little things like that we're aware of to ensure that we're delivering to a standard that is acceptable in this day and age. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, as we consider that, there's that the issue of the experience around before you get on the bus and after you get off it. I mean, I've noticed that the Frankton Hub, for example, where there's now real-time access to when your bus is going to show up, the atmosphere is much more relaxed simply by, people don't mind if the bus is 14 minutes away as long as they know that. And they're going to start getting nervous at 16 minutes when it hasn't shown up. But that's all it looks like. We'll cross that from the nodding. Hey.
The word useful is, I would expect every public service to be useful. It's actually suitable. I'm just wondering if that is a better word, because, and again, it's actually having a boat on the hill routes. Does it have bike carrying facilities? If it's going past the airport, does it have luggage racks as well, and those sort of things? And I'm just wondering if we could be using, I don't want to add another word, one that covers that, but also the other things that are important.
Just on the word useful, that is, we drew that specifically from one of the leading sort of public transport practitioners, I guess, and he has 7 demands for usefulness. So in the bigger document, we will expand on what that is, and it's usually things like the bus is reliable, or the service is reliable, it's respects me and my well-being. So there's actually quite a good expanded definition for usefulness.
But we can certainly think about the word, and there are a lot of alternatives and how to say a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, if it's going past an airport, you want it to be more than just the standard, you want it to be able to take certain places. On our hilly areas, you want to be able to take a bike or a tram.
Yep.
And those sort of things which are slightly wider, that's all. And
Thanks, we can carry on.
Just to those 2 points there, in the passenger experience section, we'll speak to both physical infrastructure and how we make it accessible. And then both what Alexa was referring to, that kind of end-to-end journey experience from your place of origin to your destination. Both of those will be covered in the passenger experience section. And the engagement we're doing is really informing those 2 components. So we can hear from the people that use our services and that are the experts themselves on what are the best actions going forward. So that being said, our first passenger experience policy topic that we want to get into is special events. In Dunedin and Queenstown, various events are held throughout the year and request RPT services support. These are things like All Blacks games, marathons, protests, as well as ongoing activities like cruise ships docking regularly through several months of the year, which has already started this year. By providing PT services to major events, we take advantage of a great opportunity to achieve our goals, like reducing emissions and traffic congestion, increasing our patronage in the long run by attracting passengers who may not often take PT, and preparing and controlling disruptions the event causes to our regular network. As well, I'll note for events with alcohol consumption, extra services enable people to have a safe way to get home. To reflect that, our event policy states that we support access to events to reduce congestion, improve safety, and maintain the operational performance of the transport network where logistically and financially, where logistically and financially feasible. So this where feasible condition at the end of this policy is purposely vague. It gives us more flexibility to support events with PT or to not. This is important when funding is an issue, as it will be, and avoids creating expectations for event organizers that services will be provided if they reasonably can't be. The first action is kind of an all catch-all action here. We want to support the delivery of public transport for special events by providing discounted fares, by undertaking promotional activities where appropriate, and contracting and managing service provision on behalf of events organizers, provided funding for those services is secured by the event organizers. In this way, these activities will attract new users to our services and ensure that funding comes from third parties rather than ratepayers. This next action refers to the need to work with TAs, event organizers, and other relevant groups to adequately prepare and coordinate our event services. To note, TAs are often the main contact for event organizers and have a concerted interest in accommodating travel to the events and keeping and addressing our road network congestion. That's Kate.
Good, you said something that you may not have intended, or you may have. You said in Dunedin and Queenstown. Now, I appreciate that that's where we've got our services, but that's not just where the events happen. And look, I'm just taking Rhythm and Alps, for example, Carone Valley. You know, why do we limit ourselves to events in Queenstown and Dunedin?
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And it would be a really neat thing. I mean, I know that Aaron Hawkins, when he was mayor, put a shout out too late in the piece for planning for having the Friday before Christmas as the tradie day and having bus services on for free to get people home. Again, not necessarily just in Dunedin. And those sort of things are a really good opportunity for ORC to show what, yeah, I'm just putting it out there. Just to ensure that we're not too Queenstown and Dunedin centric.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'll get into this shortly, but I would say contributing to that is that historically we have done a lot of the funding for our event services, which has definitely limited the service we can provide, especially geographically. So
I'm also very aware that we've changed the rating model and therefore we think those areas deserve a service. So that's, if it's just been paid for the funding, that's fine. It's not, yeah.
Thanks, Grace and Kate. That's a good discussion. I agree with all of that. The other thing that occurs to me about this is when you've mentioned it definitely about using that as using events as an opportunity to secure longer term patrons. People use it, the bus, you know, once a year to get into New Year's Eve events or whatever the event is, and that is an opportunity to really give them some incentive to use the bus throughout the year. And I wonder if we don't do that well enough at the moment, and there's an opportunity there. I think that's almost more important than discounted fares. I'm not sure that discounted fares are really that necessary on events, except for families who might have a cap, you know, or something, or some other technique there. Whereas, you know, if you're an adult and you've got 3 kids in tow, well, you might get some sort of incentive. But I really just think that there's just a much bigger opportunity than we capitalise on at the moment to drive people to that, and also to drive other people like Rhythm and Alps to cough up some cash with their event. Thank you. Oh, Elliot, you got something?
I'm very excited to see this come through. Do you think it's something we could be doing more and stuff? I was just wondering under that A1 that's written there, how much you feel we would be proactive or how much we would just be sort of waiting for event organisers to reach out if they wanted to, and then we'd work with them. What kind of balance we were expecting there?
Maybe the third action, well, that second action, working with TAs and other relevant groups is definitely a part of that. And then this third action, maintaining the annual calendar of planned major events, is definitely part of that proactive piece. Currently DCC or the TAs manage their own calendar, but we would and share it with us. We would like to start doing that ourselves. So exactly like you said, we can be a bit more proactive towards it, and be strategic in providing services that will have the greatest impact.
I was also.
I was just gonna say that being proactive requires budget to go with it. That's the bit that we don't have. this morning.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
we just
I
need
was looking
to
for it as well.
activate it in terms of when we would bring it in and how we would.
Yeah. Well, that's for us to give you guys, but I was also wondering around, and I was going to bring it up in the environmental funding workshop later, but it's probably better to bring it in. Raise it now. I was wondering how we might potentially make the most of our regional public transport plan when it comes to our environmental initiatives as well. For example, I know Enviro Schools has some struggles with transport and organising that and stuff, and even though they might not be big enough events to warrant it under a policy like this, that might also be helping us achieve some of our environmental goals or something that wouldn't be covered by goals in the RPTP.
So we're just doing some work at the moment on like a sponsorship type policy, and so we've just done some initial stock take across the organisation to see the types of approaches we have from groups and organisations, and then see what we do with it, because we get, you know, the car free day and the Enviro Schools day and all of those, and we don't have funding across the board for them, and we don't have any direction in terms of when we can and can't support them. So we're looking to do that as a separate piece of work, but it would support both this and the Enviro Schools environmental initiatives and things like that.
Awesome, thanks. Because the other thing I thought of was maybe we could even, in the eco fund, groups could apply for transport support as well as just money from us or something like that. But yeah, either way, great to hear that that's been thought about. Thanks.
That's this afternoon.
Thanks. We'll continue on in just the time.
So just in sum, this policy and these actions takes a bit more of a conditional strategy on event support, which is meaningfully different from what we're doing now. So it's an area that we're looking to get feedback on and consult with our operations side of the team on what would really work best. But in this funding environment, we're looking to bear less of the cost of activities like this. And one more note is that we currently have an event policy in draft where all of these will be formalized and in greater detail as well. This next passenger experience policy topic we'd like your thoughts and input into is public information. Public information includes any info on things like wayfinding, fares, ticketing, code of conduct, timetable, accessibility, and real-time information. We use a lot of methods to communicate with users and the wider community, including social media, the transit wayfinding app, on-bus posters, electronic real-time signage, those e-signs, our 24-hour customer experience phone, and the Ourbus website. Our services are only as good as the public info we provide for them, which leads us to our guiding policy. Simply stating, clear, accurate, and accessible public information is provided through up-to-date channels. This policy captures 4 principles of public info. 1, it should be easy for users and the wider community to understand. 2, it should be accurate and up to date so the users can use our services with confidence. 3, it should be accessible for people of all abilities. And 4, it should use up-to-date channels to be as convenient as possible. I should also say that public info is a space that we can focus on over the next 3 years when funding is limited. How we improve public information and breaking down barriers for passengers is something that we can put our attention on while we don't have the means to majorly expand our services. So some corresponding actions include collaborating with TAs to ensure the public information we provide accurately reflects their activities, as well as being confident our public info is useful to all passengers through working with relevant stakeholders. Regarding this next action on exempt services, beyond our integral services, which are Orbus and total mobility services, Otago is connected by a network of services like intercity and community trust drivers. Where it doesn't hurt our ORC services, we'll seek to help Otago residents understand the level of connectivity in the region by sharing their info. This third action speaks to the importance of good real-time information. Providing real-time info on up-to-date channels, such as providing a bus delay alert on the transit wayfinding app in a timely manner, is crucial to meeting our passengers' expectations at this point. While we are doing better than we have in past, we're still not always doing it consistently as well as we'd like to. Last time I was here with you, I reported on our PT customer feedback data. And through collecting and analyzing that data, I can tell you that reliable real-time info is a major priority for many passengers. This last action of developing accessible formats of public info like sign language, easy read, braille, large print, and audio reflects our needs to continue to bring in accessible public info formats to truly meet all of our passengers' needs. Any feedback on this policy topic here?
Andrew, then Kate.
The best public isolation generally from the driver when people are in desperate need. Excuse me. I just wonder, probably a question for Lorraine, in the contract space, or maybe Jack, is there a level of, and there's no disrespect to any bus driver, but some are better than others. Most of them are exceptional in terms of being able to communicate. But there's the odd one that isn't that flash. And I just wondered whether in the contract you have the ability to set a standard that helps that communication or that engagement when it occurs directly with passengers. Is there any way of lifting that even a little bit higher? And it's pretty good.
Yeah, it comes down to 2 things. There is some ability, but it really comes down to, I feel, and even if it's in the contract, it still requires contract management. So this is a little bit of work that we're also starting, which is around helping our bus drivers across the board to have, I guess, a high level of either providing information, but just in terms of understanding how any and all of our directions, where they have discretion, that they're clear on what is within their discretion and what isn't, and just, I guess, that level of service and their I guess professional, if you like, professional standards. So it's a twofold thing. We can do it by contract, but we also probably need to be better clients, if you see what I mean, better buyers of their service, help them develop. Recognising though that we do get a lot of praise for a number of drivers, and there are
Yeah,
some
no, it's-
really good ones out there on the net.
Anytime on all the bus, the praise is there 99% of the time. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
You just need to stay on the bus.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, and we have Kate next.
I just want to, for everyone else's benefit, Alexa and I and staff got to hear the absolutely compelling messages from the blind at the Regional Land Transport Committee submissions this year. They were outstanding submissions, and it didn't seem like a high bar to activate public transport for them. And many of the groups here, I mean, I would just put them up there as the people who definitely are marginalised by not being able to have any other form of transport, being utterly dependent otherwise, and how simple it was if they had audio to be able to use the system well. They're just amazing what they can keep in their minds. So I almost prioritise some of those actions above others, and as much as that's not necessarily great, everyone benefits from an audio except for deaf. And so some are higher level. Don't try and do scattergun and not do anything well. The other one is the place of social media. I'm utterly frustrated these days in the amount of time you can get data delivered to you in different ways and how unhelpful that is, and whether we should actually be trying to own that delivery more so than distributing it. It's just very costly. The money goes elsewhere, and it's not easy to find again. And yeah, I'm just wondering whether we are as smart using social media if we don't own the platform, or at least have some surety about the platform. Yeah, sometimes less is more.
Thanks, Kate. We'll carry on.
Okay, so it's on to my next one. So now we're looking at value for money. I pretty much sequence of slides as Grace did. But value for money is obviously always going to be something coming through from government, and something that everyone wants to achieve in terms of making sure you get more bang for your buck. Wherever an organisation is spending money, that's just inherent to local government and other forms of government. It's really important because value for money can always be seen as a negative thing and saying you can't spend these things, but there is two sides to the fraction. There's the value and there's the money, and the value is the things that we deliver and the benefits to our community. And in any case, the biggest topic under value for money and the greatest public interest is always going to be those fears. But there are other topics. Related to fears is your alternative revenue streams. Then you've got your procurement policies, and also other policies in the area. Maybe optimization of services. Are our services fully efficient? Can we deliver more services for the same amount of money? However, the primary topic here is fears. So the framing of fears here, the phrase is always fears, and that's always about fairness and affordability to both sides of the ledger. We as a council and obviously ratepayers in the community who provide much of the funding for the council, it's really important that it's affordable for us, but also affordable for users, and the balance between those two is the really big challenge. Obviously we have central government at present, which is drawing a lot of attention to private share recovery and saying, hey, we're not that keen to provide funding if you're only getting 5% of it back in fares. We're well above that 5%, but nonetheless, there's the challenge we face. So we need to make sure we set policies around fare levels and fare structures that deliver both sides of what we want to deliver for the affordability, but then we don't want to lose funding because of this funding environment. So this is a challenge that we're obviously going to navigate. We're doing a separate piece of work parallel to this, which is getting this in a quantitative way an understanding of how fare changes will affect our revenue. So we're just embarking on that as a piece of work. But in terms of RPTP policy, we really need to articulate what are the principles behind those fares on two levels. One is the structure, and one is the base fare level. So the base fare level is just essentially what's the total amount of fare revenue we're going to get, what's the starting point for our fares, and then the structure is how do those fares vary for a wide variety of reasons, concessions, the distance of trips, maybe repeated use. So we've got free transfers as very standard public transport now. Users with less ability to pay as your concessions, and concessions are one of the strategies by which we can mitigate if we are forced to put fares up, and those concessions make it a little bit less tough on the people most affected. Regular use is particularly has in mind our fare capping policies. Is there going to be a limit to how much you pay per week, per month, per day? And sustainable land use. Daniel will get into a bit more detail about land use, but if people are paying the same distance to travel 20 kilometres as they are to travel 2 kilometres, fares should be simple, but they also need to be fair, and we need to find the balance between those two. And so that might refer to the question of a zonal fare system, whether that's only zonal over very long distances, or if that's going back to the very granular zonal fare system we had previously. But those are policy decisions for us to make. But the general structure is that we have to balance these sort of considerations while focusing on that simplicity. A2 is the action for fare level, and this is just a statement of that balance between affordability for users and recovery of operating costs. And then there'll be some supplementary actions around private share targets, which the government through NZTA is ensuring they want to set targets with us. So it's not going to be the old thing we saw however many years ago of a blanket 50% target for everyone, but there's going to be a desire to return to old performance levels, or in that direction anyway. And A4 is the potential for a revenue plan, particularly with regards to alternative revenue sources. Third-party revenue is one of the things that the government really wants to promote, and delivering the accessibility. Public transport delivers, I've said it delivers benefits to the community. It delivers benefits to its users. The benefits to its users are really important. Our services we think should be worth paying for. But the third side is, for example, our businesses generate benefits from public transport when their workers take public transport. Other organisations also generate benefits from public transport. If we can find ways to represent some of the benefits, that's our third-party revenue, and that may also relate to some of the land use issues later. So, any questions on this big topic?
It's good to see this topic moving along. It's time we started looking at. In the interest of time, let's try and keep these questions quite short. But as Andrew and then Elliot and Tim.
I just got a query around the grow alternative revenue streams. I just wonder why bus advertising is only on the back of the bus and not on either side. Because it might be fine if you're on the road, you'll see the advert. But if you're walking, there's a big chunk of people out there on the street. I just think there's a lost opportunity there, but I don't know how it's structured. I don't understand that.
In general, I understand that the bus back revenue is a much larger portion of the cost. You don't get so much from other areas. So where that side revenue, that side advertising interferes with the branding, there are probably more negatives to it. Let's not say we couldn't do it, but the biggest benefits are the biggest revenue is from the bus back, is my understanding.
And in terms of the supporting chance with the whole fare structure, I think the bullet points you've got there are reasonable and fair to try and come up with a system that better reflects value for money. And if you look around the city, there's plenty of examples. Route 1, 40 k's to Waikawati.
59.
Yeah, exactly. Back in 2010, I'd catch the bus from Waikawati to town. It cost me $8.50. So, and the same Peninsula, Mosgiel, etc. So the system needs it needs tweaked, and obviously to retain our support from NZTA, there's a push in that direction anyway. So I think if we make changes, we'll have to, it would need to be stepped, not a dramatic, because we don't want to lose all those good customers that we've got and scale them off. So
And the other thing, just to bear in mind, is some of those other services we like to have, we bid on the Dalhousie service and we didn't get funding for it. And if we are to get funding on services like that, or the Alexandria to Queensland service, then it's going to look it's not going to look great for NZTA decision makers at those fare levels.
Thank you, Elliot Finn. Kim?
Look, I guess I'm curious what alternative revenue streams would be. Like I just don't know what they would be, but I'm very nervous about undermining the network by investigating that stuff or trying to grow the fair portion of the revenue that we get, because I think we could really risk doing long-term damage to the network by undermining it by doing that. But I'm happy to look at what those options are and stuff, and the fare structure and stuff in terms of zoning and all that. Is working with those local businesses and stuff like Auckland Council's done with their like fair share stuff. Is that something we're looking at as well?
Yes,
around the space.
that's a key example of the sort of thing we have in mind. Along with maybe some more land use oriented ones with some of our developments.
Cool. But something like that wouldn't really grow our revenue stream, right? That would just be more customer experience kind of.
It would transform customer revenue into third party revenue.
Yeah.
Someone else would be paying the fares, but it might grow patronage, which would grow or benefit the net revenue.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, we'll come back to this in just a minute.
Sorry, everyone, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes. We've just had an update that I think it's urgent that council's aware of before potentially there's some public news, but I will just ask that once Gretchen will give you the update, we get back to focusing on this workshop, which is possibly going to be a big ask, but let's just say that I need you to once we've got this. But I think, in the interest of no surprises, it's just important that Gretchen provides you a quick update, and then we'll get straight back to this important workshop.
Okay, so excuse me.
Is this public?
This is not public, so I'm just double checking that we're not recording at the moment or anything like that.
Isn't recording at the moment.
Yeah, I thought so.
back into this, we were talking, and Tim, you had a question about, on the value for money place, about, revenue plan, I think.
Yeah, look, it's just something that has always sort of bothered me a little bit, and it's in the policies box that you've got up there. Those who benefit from public transport contribute a fair share towards overall cost of service. And our rates, we're charging people who don't benefit from public transport. And it's just, I mean, if we're talking about equity, that just doesn't seem right to me. I mean, it seems that, yeah, that's the council supported that over time, but it's an issue for me personally, and just wondering about how we go about doing that better. You know, we talk about services between Alexandra and Queensland and Wanaka and that, but and trials and all that, but I noticed they're the first things to go when we've got budget constraints, but we're still charging rates for people in those areas. Oamaru, Belcluta, Tapanui, those sorts of things. So it's just, I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Can I just understand that, I'm not sure if it was a question, but your point there is about the
Microphone, please.
yeah, sorry. Can I just understand? So you as a resident in Dunedin get charged through your rates a bus passenger transport levy. And you're saying you get no benefit from it, or?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay, so I just want to try to understand.
User pays basically is what we've got up there. So people who haven't got access to public transport are still being paid. They're still being charged through their rates for a portion of, I think it was 20% or something like that, spread overall. I just don't see that as particularly equitable. That's all.
Okay, so I sort of understand.
Lloyd?
Thanks, Alex, probably saving up for this section just quietly in the background. I just think at the end of the day, you've got to go back to your very first slide, which is your goals. And your goals are reduce congestion, reduce carbon and promote active transport. And then the next 16 slides are all about how we're going to be servicing people for healthcare in Belcluta, and we're going to be worrying about people who are less fortunate or whatever, all these extra add-on stuffs. And at the end of the day, you've got to get back to the actual netting of what actually the public transport is for. And so I very much back up what Tim was saying. We actually have to work with, in today's environment, you've got to target in your home territory, your zone, and that's what you've got to be working on to make that as efficient as good as possible, and have it paid and have it financed appropriately, because it's not sustainable for the people and the people that are living outside that zone to be paying 20% for fluffy stuff. So we need to keep it really basic. There you go. Schools, like putting on transport for events, good idea if it's fully funded for by the person riding the bus, not by the taxpayer. At the end of the day, that's the way it needs to be, because we can't be just saying, oh, Joey, we'll pay for you to go to the Coldplay concert or whatever. Yeah, that's my opinion.
I don't have a question, but rather a comment. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Look, I think it's really important to take a wide view of the benefits of public transport and the benefits of someone going on a bus. The benefit of someone going on a bus is not restricted to that person on the bus. It benefits everyone living in that area because they're not in their car. It benefits everyone living in Otago because they're not spewing out further carbon emissions. And one of those major goals there, and I don't think I'm having to convince you, is about environmental sustainability and regarding reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So getting more people wherever in Otago hopping on the bus instead of taking their own car is an important part of that. Thank you.
Yeah, similar, but I just want to because totally appreciate the point that you guys would be keen for more on the user pays kind of end of things, and that's a fair enough position. I think I see it slightly differently, but that's perfectly okay, but I do think it's a little unfair to bring up the 20% stuff, because that's a decision that was entirely made around the council table, so it's not really anything coming from the public transport team or anything, that's a decision we made amongst the table.
Okay, is that the comment? Okay, and I think what we're seeing here is two somewhat different ideological approaches, and one is an approach that is more individually focused and looking at the benefit for the individual, whereas the other is more collectively focused. And I think we can think about ways to ensure transport equity. I mean, some of the advantages that people receive, even if they never ride a bus, are quite evident, and that is around climate change, the ability for centres like Dunedin and Queenstown to operate more efficiently, transport for things like 16-year-olds who can't drive independently yet, but they are educating in those centres and they travel to them and so on and so forth. So I take a wide view, as Alan points out, that in an event that that people may get a cheap or free or whatever bus to, if you are somebody that's trying to use roads and parking or whatever, when an event is on, you benefit substantially from those people being the people that are attending the event on a bus. So I think those arguments can kind of go any way, but I kind of feel that there's a position that we can come to. User pays really worries me. I think it's a dangerous kind of slope that you can get onto. It depends where we're putting this cost to not damage our network. And I think there's things like capping fares, that can ensure that there's equity for people who use buses a lot, and everybody else is reaping the benefit of them using that bus, but making sure that perhaps they only end up paying $2 a trip, even though the one-off use of that bus might be quite a lot higher. So there are techniques that we can bring in, and we may have to go that way in order to make some of these revenue targets that we're going to need to make. Lorraine, please, yes, shut me up.
So I think Jack touched on it briefly. So we have a parallel work stream that we're using Stantec, who did a lot of work for the Dunedin fares and frequency to look at across the region, fare structures, fare products, such as capping and things like that, which we will bring back to you. But the purpose of this today, and we do need to move on to the other things, is really to just get this preliminary feedback on the principles, because the decision still needs to be around the table as to where that falls. We just want to be best able to provide the information with the views that we've had come forward. I want to signal that those services that you mentioned were lost. They're not lost. We haven't received co-funding. So we need to come back to the table, and this is what we will be doing in the next day. The decision is always used to, do we continue to rate and spend local share, or do we do something else? And those decisions can be guided in future by the principles in the RPTP, but they are decisions that need to be made in the policy framework that we have at the time. And at the moment, we are discussing, that future environment. You've still got to make a few of those decisions, and they'll be coming to you over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Andrew.
Sorry, when we talk about user pays, I don't think it's appropriate in this conversation. So I would much rather us say that there's going to be an adjustment to the subsidised fares, because if you said we're going to a user pay system, that tells me it's 100% user pays. So there is no NZTA subsidy, there is no ratepayer subsidy. So I don't think that should be in the conversation. It's adjusting that subsidised fare structure, the way I see it. Sorry.
Okay, it's fair enough.
All right, so we've got two more objectives left, and I'm just gonna go straight to number 5 and then move back to 4, because number 5 is the one that I really want to sort of have a wider conversation about. One thing that you might find with objectives 4 and 5 is that they kind of run through all of our other ones as well. So yeah, we might have already touched on some of this stuff. So the objective is to invest in a public transport system that promotes the best possible environmental outcomes regarding greenhouse gas emissions, pollutants, and land use. And we started with the transport goals around congestion, carbon emissions, and active transport. And those, those three goals are sort of inherently environmental objectives. If you achieve those, then you typically get good environmental outcomes. And what the sort of international research and best practices shows is probably the biggest factor impacting environmental sustainability with public transport is urban design. And so basically, if you have urban design that is good for public transport, then it is also good for the environment. I'm aware that the ORC is not, does not do zoning and things like that, but we will sort of get into how we play into that in a second. And so and so the National Policy Statement on Urban Development sort of has objectives and policies specifically sort of arguing for certain types of urban design. And then also in our regional land transport plan, we argue for certain types of urban design. And so the things I'm presenting here are actually pretty sort of well established. Waikato Regional Council, ECAN, and Greater Wellington Bay of Plenty, they've all kind of put this in their regional public transport plans. And we've sort of mentioned it, but not in our 2021, but haven't really sort of hashed out a more detailed plan. And so when we do public transport, we want to think about 4 sort of urban design principles. One is proximity, are the key destinations, are they close to one another or are there long distances? Linearity, are our bus routes sort of more linear or are they meandering? Connectivity are the bus routes connected with streets or disconnected from local streets? And then also density. Are the sort of key destinations that people are going to, whether it's where they live, work, recreation, shops, are they more sort of dense or are they sprawled? And what the research shows is that when you have urban design that is sort of, the proximity is short, bus routes are linear, things are more connected and they're more dense, you typically have much better environmental outcomes. Your congestion is lower, your greenhouse gas emissions are lower, there's much more active transport, energy demand is lower, your impact on nature, and also your cost of public transport tends to be lower. And so sort of general best practices says that these are the principles that will lead to the best environmental outcomes. And so this actually was released a couple weeks ago from one of the leading public transport advocates around the world. And I want you to kind of take a couple seconds to look at how urban design impacts public transport in relation to rates and kind of stable services and density. And if you can see here, we often operate in a space where urban design tends to be low density, but people also want low rates. And so the outcome of that is that it's really hard to bring good sort of public transport services to people. And like I was saying with the policy statement on urban development and all the other regional councils, they're sort of saying that development should move more towards the more density area. I guess I'm wondering your thoughts on these sort of trade-offs.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, I've seen this little Venn diagram many a time, so that's a real good one. But like pretty clear that for the outcomes that we want, yeah, and for them to be affordable, we're gonna have to shift that urban design in that direction. I think we've got the FDS and stuff that are shifting stuff in that direction, but like that would be really good if there was anything else we could do towards that. So I'm curious if you have any ideas in that
space.
So I guess that brings us to the next slide, which is that's our objective. And so these policies are actually sort of drawn pretty closely to what Waikato Regional Council's done. So the first policy is that the council will not provide public transport services sufficient to enable well-functioning urban areas where the nature and location of the proposed urban development is inconsistent with the urban forum and the sort of principles that I laid out. I guess another way to put it is that for new developments, what that policy is saying is that if you want to make a new development, that's fine, but if you want to do it in a way that is going to be difficult and expensive to bring public transport, then we might not be able to do that. The second one is kind of just complementing that one, which is development of new urban areas, redevelopment and or expansion of existing urban areas should be undertaken in a way. So it's sort of encouraging that when development does happen, it's done in a way that is consistent with those principles that will enable more public transport.
It's probably a question for you, Madam Chair, because the issues with urban development are much more prevalent than they are in Queenstown than they are in Dunedin, and even will be in Dunedin. But just thinking about Ladies Mile and some of these other developments in and around Queenstown, which are obviously going to hold ahead with fast track legislation and government, whatever else. But looking at those policies, I'm just wondering, are we going to create, is this going to backfire if we have a policy like this? Could it create some unintended consequences? I suppose that's my question, maybe for Madam Chair initially, but you guys no doubt have knowledge as well, but you know the district and you know the challenges that they've currently got.
I think it's highly problematic that I might just throw that to Lorraine before my reckon comes in, and hers will have a bit more of a.
I did just want to make the point that Queenstown is very challenging, but then we've had a long involvement in collaborative space with the transport planning there through the Way to Go, and also through the land development with Rowell Waiora. We feed into that from our public transport planning, as well as sort of our other regional council environmental responsibility for the form and location of development there. And the Queenstown is still in the process of finalising its future development strategy, whereas we've already done that in Dunedin, and we did have an input there. But you still really need to think about these principles, because we know we're going to come under a lot of pressure to provide something in the towns like Wanaka and other fast-growing areas potentially, where they may not be, and there might not be the potential for the even I guess the direction from territorial authorities for the development to occur, and we need to be very clear as a council as it comes back to our value for money investment, and where you've got a smaller town or city and the development is low density. Often if you're making a public transport intervention, you're looking at, we talked about these concepts a bit, but like applying it, you're going to end up with a coverage network, and you're going to be targeting people who are in that disadvantage potentially, and it's a good and worthy to invest in public transport. But probably the people who are putting the pressure on are expecting the public transport network to deal with congestion and to deliver ridership, and that's probably what the evidence and the international, it's not just here, everybody says is probably not going to, it's going to be closer to that black area. It's going to be highly expensive, or it's going to have to have some dramatic change.
And this was the point I made in the previous workshop earlier today, that coverage decisions happen by default. this land use, getting the land use right is a ridership decision. And if we're indifferent on it, then we'll walk into coverage decisions and public transport will become less affordable for everyone, and less useful for everyone. It's not fun.
I think this is probably timely. It's probably time for us to do this. And in the past, I mean, we've only had public transport in Queenstown since 2017, I think. And it's been led by demand. So, you know, wherever somebody's decided to put their bunch of houses, we will follow with a bus service. And what this policy is doing is putting the stick in the sand and saying, actually, no, if you're thinking that you're going to need a public transport service, you need to get your urban design in place. And it probably is time, especially for Queenstown, for this to happen. And when you think about Wanaka and the way that town is developed as a spider out from a centre that's right on the lakeshore, man, that's starting to get into some very expensive public transport. And thank you for those rules, Lorraine, because I got them from you.
I heard them before.
Yeah, I think have you heard them before? The spider development of Wanaka. But you know, these are the sorts of things that we have to think about. And I think that we do have to put that stick in the sand, and it may help those territorial authorities go, hang on a minute, public transport's not automatically going to follow where development goes. So at the moment, I'm feeling quite uncomfortable with that.
And I suppose a little bit more flesh on the bones, but you know, a lot of that development in Queensland it's piecemeal, and the developers get their way by basically appealing the decision that they you know, by the commissioners or whatever, take to the environment court, and they've got deep pockets. They eventually get their way. So that was where I'm sort of coming from. So yeah, anyway, no, good stuff.
Well, this policy will be telling them they cannot expect public transport to follow, which is good, and that leads into policy too. I think you've done very well on that those policies actually so far.
Real advantage Queenstown has is for public transport is we would have been driven to coverage, but there's just no capacity in the network. It's very constrained roading network, means we've developed a ridership network by default, which is not the norm. So yes, we will have ongoing issues, but as I said, we are working through those processes with them. But some of our other county and settlements, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, just to supplement your comment was on these factors. It's important that it's not just about density. It's not just about, you know, building apartments or medium density housing. It is also those other factors. And en route is a great example of linearity and connectivity. So even though it might not do so well on proximity or density, but it does do well on linearity and connectivity. So that's street designs, the shape of a town, the ability to design a public transport network that fits a town, which is where it's different to a place like Wanaka. So other than just that it's a low growth environment. So I just wanted to add in that comment. We always talk about density as this one thing. But density has very specific meaning in public transport. Public transport routes are linear, they're lines, they're not geographic areas, which means that it might be different to something like cycling, which is more of a two-dimensional activity because you can use the whole road network. Side comment there.
Thank you. Did you have further to add there, Daniel?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. And I think, yeah, just a reminder that these policies as written are done in a way that it's for new proposed developments, not ones that are currently existing. And that doesn't mean that no public transport services will be provided. It's just bringing them up to a level where it's going to be extremely useful, will be really challenging. So yeah, like I think you said, it kind of draws a little bit of a line in the sand. I'll just go back to number 4 because that's the one I really wanted to talk about.
We've got about 15 minutes left. So
yep, awesome.
We'll take us.
Yeah, cool. So our 4th one, I think this kind of runs through all of the other objectives, which is about building trust. And you know, it often happens internationally where decisions are made where communities and people are, I was not consulted, or you know, it didn't feel like my voice was heard. And so we think it's really important to have building trust being a core part of this plan. And so our objective here is to proactively engage with communities and organizations, including iwi, to foster trust and ensure that our public transport projects align with community priorities. And there's sort of a few headings that we'll have in the actual plan, but the one I want to talk about today is policies to improve access for people experiencing transport disadvantages. That's sort of the topic that's kind of come up a bit. So people can experience transport disadvantages for many reasons. They could have accessibility needs, mobility impairments. Like we mentioned earlier, you could be a child, low incomes, rural communities. So there's a lot of people who really rely on public transport to not just achieve their basic needs, but to have them access opportunities, whether it's visiting friends or going for a nice walk or something like that. And so, like, you could have someone like Benazir, who could be a former refugee resettled in Dunedin, doesn't speak English, has a really hard time sort of getting around, might require the public transport system to sort of do basic things, or someone like Margaret, who her driver's license might be expired. And so really needs the bus to be able to get groceries, see friends, things like that. And so so it's really important that we talk about people experiencing transport disadvantages from an equity perspective. It's also a legal requirement from the LTMA that we talk about how we're going to serve these groups. In doing so, it's sort of wider benefits for the community, making sure that people can meet their basic needs. But also sort of long-term economic opportunities, allowing people to access jobs, education opportunities. And so what the research shows is that sort of if we want to talk about helping people with transport disadvantages, there's sort of three main equity principles that we need to prioritize. The first one is community engagement, which is basically saying when we make public transport decisions, that we need to be proactive in engaging communities that are underrepresented. Making sure that we're specifically engaging these people experiencing transport disadvantages. Another one is access. Residents across Otago can safely access multiple transport options to reach their destination. Within the areas that we serve buses, like in Dunedin and Queenstown, we want to make sure that buses are a good alternative to private vehicles, but also in the rural areas, promoting community transport and other options for interregional transports is going to be a big focus. And then the last one is about addressing historical disinvestment, and that's sort of focusing on areas that have historically been underserved by transportation. Places, and I'm thinking like places like Oamaru, which does not have any major fixed route bus services, but is a really potential good opportunity to have a bus service going through there. And so based off of that, we have our objectives. The main policy is that equity will be put at the forefront of public transport decision making. And this kind of, in ways that we will serve sort of transport disadvantage. So the first action is about collecting data. It's hard to meet people's needs if we don't actually understand them. What are the barriers that communities face? There's a lot of sort of quantitative data that we can use to help us with that goal. A second action is about the engagement, is about speaking with people, getting their stories, helping them articulate their public transport needs so that we can co-create solutions. And again, this moves just beyond, hey, we wrote this public, this RPTP, write a submission. That's a bit too late in the process. It really requires more sort of proactive engagement with these communities. And then also making sure that when we prioritize our public transport investments, that we sort of want one of our sort of key metrics or things that we're aiming for is boosting patronage for people experiencing transport disadvantages. Yeah, so I guess maybe your thoughts on some of these.
Kate?
We're going down to Belfruitha, I think, next month, and I had been hoping that we'd be having a session after, and I haven't followed up, sorry. Just opening it up, and that's just an example of something we can build trust with, just at least, I think Alexa, Andrew and I were interested, I'm sure there's other councillors, just meeting anyone who had got ideas about what that might look like, and engaging at an early start, that conversation. But Daniel, the one that came to mind in this is meeting a girl at Enviro Schools from Oamaru a number of years ago, who lived in Kurau. Her parents were dairy farmers there. She was a leader in the Waitaki school community, obviously, but she couldn't participate in any after-school activities because her limitation was vast. She couldn't participate in any sport, and her activities were very much constrained. And it just brings to heart both that rural, but also that other thing. And I mean, I know there are people in Kurau who work in Oamaru who could be having a late evening, I mean, an early evening bus service, but we don't put up all of those component parts. We look at individual schools, we look at people working, but we don't try and accumulate what it looks like for the cyclist, for the school and the workers together that might justify a service. And I just wanted to put that out there. Not a question, sorry, but as an expression of a real need that she obviously really lacked and missed out on that, quite a substantial part of her education before she couldn't participate in any of those other curricular activities. That's just, thank you.
I think that story is really powerful, and I think it's part of sort of the community engagement is about if you know, it's probably difficult for us to understand that story without having heard it. And the only way to hear it is through engagement. And so the more engagement we do, the more stories we can collect and the better decision making that we can make, particularly regarding people in rural areas.
And hence I would hope that we could put it out somewhere in Belfruitha that the people around the table who do understand the transport network at their level, or the buses, how they do open up lives, be great.
Thank you, Tim. I think that takes us right through the presentation. Is that right? Oh, Alan, please go ahead.
Yeah, look, there was just one other thing, if I've got time to raise briefly around this, and I guess it was just to raise the issue of the health effects of motor vehicle pollution, and I know it gets a brief mention in your environmental sustainability, and particularly with the recent MFE report on our Air 2024, which we understand but you know, these much more serious than had previously been understood. And I know too that this plan can't deal with all that, and it's part of a bigger picture, and it connects with our air plan and air strategy as well. But just if, you know, your thoughts, or just take away a note to see how that, how this plan can help specifically around those issues where motor vehicle pollution, and it's likely to be in larger urban centres, I guess. But seeing that as a serious, important driver for further getting people out of polluting vehicles.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that a lot of the health effects and you know, from private vehicle use, public transport has a really important to play almost as sort of an outcome. We are decarbonizing our bus fleet, so we'll have fully electric buses, and hopefully, you know, if we have more people taking the bus, fewer cars will lead to, well, obviously less congestion and better health outcomes.
Andrew?
Sorry, something really random, but when you talk about disadvantaged people experience transport disadvantages, I do wonder whether we have a role, and it's more to do with the existing community services that are sort of, they fill the gaps out far and wide. Whether we would consider having some sort of schedule, whatever, where funding would potentially be able to be sourced, obviously not NZTA because they're probably not eligible, but there's lots of community trusts that have a focus on environmental sustainability, et cetera, and I just wondered whether a resource that we could have and slide under the nose of some of these communities and say, look, if you've got someone who could do some homework online and whatever.
those community vehicle trusts are something we've drawn attention to elsewhere in this. Obviously, it's a model in Canterbury and Waikato, and we're keen on that as a part of our solution.
Thank you much. Yeah, okay.
It's just environment, it's only because we've got 5 minutes, environmental sustainability. One of the disconnects and why I was really keen to see this being public and active transport is that we often compete for people who can do both. But we don't use the active transport network, which is really effective, as a feed in sometimes for public transport. And I just wanted to ensure that we're going to embed that in there somewhere. We've got some really neat active transport links, but then it runs out for a bus system. And I'm just putting that out there. And I'll put a shout out to the Port Ferry, how important that is as a connection at the moment and how much it was used with the landslips. What a great service. And if it wasn't for the active transport, we wouldn't have that service. So sometimes we need to make sure that we can rely on those things. So I just don't always see those connections.
Thanks for your presentation, team. I think the place of public transport as a driver of health, well-being, connections, and many of the good things that we want as communities isn't well understood. But your presentation demonstrates you have a really good understanding of those things, so that's awesome. And how you've presented the issues and opportunities is really, really strong. And I hope that as we carry on through this process, that we can encourage a better understanding in the minds of the public and people, and understanding of the role of public transport and its increasing importance as we increasingly urbanise. And but also it can also connect the communities between the urban centres, so that mustn't be forgotten, because we still have a big rural, huge area between the urban centres. But good work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this progress and seeing how we might take these messages out to the community and foster a much better and wider understanding of PT's place in our urban system. Thank you. Has anybody got anything final that they want to bring or indicate?
Can I just say thank you for your input today? Thank you for your input into the process. We as a team are going to take all these ideas away, of course, and we'll be continuing to work on those policies, objectives and actions, and we'll be circulating it through to you ahead of the next POTC meeting. So if you go home tonight and think of something you forgot to say, there will be other opportunities to contribute again. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I won't close with Tara here because we've got another workshop following.
Thanks, Alexa.
We will break from here. Thanks everybody for your attention.